How did Owen Jones react to the pulling of the documentary?
I can't say I've looked. I don't spend a lot of time following him. I would imagine he thought it was not right to do so. Do you know how he?
Yeah, he was not happy.
Okay.
So as you can imagine, he said all the things.
The thing is, let me say this, right? It's not about what you think about Israel. Even if you don't like Israel's behavior in this war, to make a documentary that is demonstrably going against the rules of fair journalism, so non-sequential editing, hiding the identity of a child who's connected to Hamas through his family, through his father. They've now admitted they made payments to that child's family into the sister's bank account for his mother. Now, that in and of itself, I'm not an accountant, but if you brought me a transaction like that, I'd say, what are you trying to hide? The idea that license fee payers' money has potentially gone to people connected with Hamas.
You're never supposed to pay interviewees for documentaries.
Well, they said in the end that they paid him for the narration. And even that then revealed that if they paid him for the narration, it's because he was performing a role as an actor. And we knew that because his narration was clearly recorded in a recording studio somewhere in Gaza and was clearly scripted. He talked about things which were not in what they today call his lived experience. He had factual information which was not from his perspective. He talked about the lives of the other characters in the film who we don't think he met. So he was then paid for that role. So my point here is that it broke so many rules of how you make documentaries and films and current affairs pieces that just on that basis, it should have been pulled. For 500 people like Gary Lineker and the like, to say that this film should be put back and that these criticisms are racist is obviously moronic. And those people should assess their own biases because they need to ask why, in the case of a film trashing the Jewish state, Israel, they're happy for all those things to happen. But probably in another case, they wouldn't be. I mean, I was on the radio the other day. They had Juliet Stevenson, the actress, saying that it was wrong and it should be put up and it should be put back on the air. And I just don't understand how she didn't think, for example, it was a problem to have a Hamas guy's son narrate the whole film. I bet she would have a problem if the BBC showed a film with a conservative MP's child narrating the whole film on a contentious political issue where they don't tell you that it is a conservative MP's child. But when it came to Hamas, a prescribed genocidal, anti-Semitic, brutal, medieval, backwards terrorist organization, that was fine.
Something I've wondered aloud on the podcast a few times, but are we at a point now where there are enough Muslims in this country? It doesn't mean all Muslims agree one way or another, but many do. I mean, we know this with Jews, 95%, I think, are Zionists. So you can tell from a person's set of beliefs what they're likely to believe and so on. We do have a situation where we have a lot of Muslims in this country. We don't have many Jews. So the influence, despite the sort of cliche, the stereotype the Jews are influencing the media and so on, the influence that British Jews have, 200,000 in the country, right, compared to, well, some people say up to 10 million Muslims, some people say 4 or 5 million. We don't quite know. Everybody in this country is going to know and have a friend who is Muslim and who will be giving one side of this argument. Is the BBC just destined to be a little bit infiltrated by people who are either Islamists or have some sympathy for Islam? And is there any way to come back from that?
I don't see this as a fight between Jews and Muslims. I see this as an issue of those of us in the West standing up for the values and culture that is important to us. Jew, Muslim, Christian, other. I'm a Jew, but I feel most passionately about this because it goes against the very principles of journalistic integrity. Yes, it's a topic I know a lot about because in my professional life, I cover Israel a lot. I'm aware of Pallywood and Palestinian manipulation and abuse of children and the manipulation of the press. But I would feel as strongly if it was in another topic. And so I would say that the BBC, especially, not being under the commercial pressures of other media outlets, has no reason to bow to some sort of unjustifiable, immoral, unfair treatment of any subject. So whether that's Brexit, climate change, Israel, Islam, Judaism, they have no reason to do it. And I'll take you back to another story. There was a bus of school children in Oxford Street a few years ago, religious Jewish children who'd gone there for a day out to celebrate the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. And they were abused by a group of Muslims on the street and fled back into the bus and had to escape. The BBC reported it as the Jewish schoolchildren having uttered an anti-Muslim slur. And there then ensued weeks of analysis of a dodgy sound recording that the BBC eventually produced, in which they said these children had said the words "dirty Muslims," as if that would justify the attack that had taken place on these children. Those children didn't say those words, or at least there is no evidence they said that. The Jewish community, at great expense, undertook independent forensic audio analysis of this stupid little clip and found that actually these children had been calling for help because it was an emergency in Hebrew. That's what the BBC had heard as dirty Muslims. It took them weeks to apologize. Eventually, Ofcom even found against them on this. This is, again, typical of how they treat complaints, but especially from Jews or people concerned about anti-Semitism. They must look at why they have so many apologies they're forced to make on Israel and Jews. You have to be willfully blind to think it's innocent and a series of innocent mistakes. When you find that you're making that number of mistakes on one particular area, today it's fashionable to call it an unconscious bias, let's say. But they won't even do that when it comes to Jews. So I think that there is a great problem in how they're dealing with that. And I think that they really need to look very, very seriously at why they're doing that. I can only assume that they know it and that they're okay with it. And that in itself is deeply troubling for all people who care about this.
That's why I disagree. That's why I mentioned, I think there's just enough Muslims working at the BBC, at Channel 4, in all of these places now.
You're assuming that Muslims all hate Jews. You're assuming that Muslims all want to lie about Israel. You're assuming that Muslims want to see Palestinian children abused by Hamas, that Palestinian children should be forced to pretend to be paramedics and that they should... You're assuming that Muslims don't care about the persecution of Muslim children? They shouldn't want it.
They would be hearing different news and different, maybe fake news, and they would be denying that this happens and closing off their mind to it. I think that's what would be happening. And I assume that because I know that Muslims, we know from Pew Research that Muslims in countries such as Syria and Afghanistan have 97 to 99% unfavorable views of Jews, 97 to 99% of the population. Those are the people we are importing to this country. I know that people, when they get together, whether they be Jews, Muslims or Scientologists, will start to believe myths and not exactly look for the truth in things because it will make them feel better about themselves. So I don't think this is Muslims working at the BBC going, wahahaha, we're going to lie and let the Pallywood stuff happen. I think it's them going, does that really happen? And is that, I don't think so. And they're hearing other things that the bad Jews have done. That's what they're hearing. That's what they go home that's what they're hearing in their families. Just as it will work the other way. You may have been at sort of Friday night dinners with Jewish family members who maybe aren't as that clued up about it. And they go, didn't you hear that? This happened about the Muslim and the Palestine, and it's not necessarily always true. It will be exaggerated sometimes because that's what families do and tribes do. So I just think if you have numbers high enough in a certain country, which we do now, it's just bound to happen where they might hear what you say and go, well, maybe that was a bit bad, but they won't pay as much attention to it as they would to something in the IDF that may have happened. And over a period of years, with enough people, that kind of bias or unconscious bias is going to filter through. And I think, in addition to, as you're right, without any Muslims there, you already have this leftist bias, don't you? So, but in addition to that, I think that's what gets us in trouble. And that's why I'm a bit pessimistic. I think it's only going to get worse as numbers of Muslims in this country increase.